Hey everybody. There's no time better than the present. That's why you're catching me with my cat in front of the screen and me buttoning my shirt. Because I've wasted too much time. So if you can do two things at once, being proactive, then it's worth doing it. Today we're going to be continuing with rule number 7 for Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. If you notice, I've gotten some contact lenses, and I'm not really looking at my face. I don't do that too often, but apparently I look like I'm crying. And that's just how I look. So hey guys. This isn't about me or my appearances. Last week we ended with delay of gratification. And so now we are on when we ended with the interesting story of Socrates. So now this section of the rule number 7 is called Death, Toil, and Evil. The tragedy of self-conscious being produces suffering, inevitable suffering. That suffering, in turn, motivates the desire for selfish, immediate gratification, for expediency. But sacrifice and work serves far more effectively than short-term impulsive pleasure at keeping suffering at bay. Excuse me, before I get started, I'm just going to drink this. This episode is brought to you by Mountain Dew Ice. It's a new drink from Mountain Dew, and it's really great. I mean, it's not regular Mountain Dew. It's got a hint of real juice in it, and it's really good. It's one of the best Mountain Dew drinks I've had, and I'm a fan of Mountain Dew. So, I'm just kidding. It's not brought to you by that. You're like, how did he get a sponsor? There's only 7 views. No. This is titled Rule Number 7. Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. But then there was a great statue. I think it's done by Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci. But you can check out the book yourself. Okay, Death, Toil, and Evil. The tragedy of self-conscious being produces suffering, inevitable suffering. That suffering, in turn, motivates the desire for selfish, immediate gratification, for expediency. But sacrifice and work serves far more effectively than short-term impulsive pleasure at keeping suffering at bay. However, tragedy itself, conceived of as the arbitrary harshness of society and nature set against the vulnerability of the individual, is not the only, and perhaps not even the primary, source of suffering. There is also the problem of evil to consider. The world is set hard against us, of a certainty, but man's inhumanity to man is something even worse. Thus, the problem of sacrifice is compounded in its complexity. It is not only privation and mortal limitation that must be addressed by work, but work by the willingness to offer and to give up. It's the problem of evil as well. One thing I've noticed at recent acts of evil in society is when somebody's doing a mass shooting or something like that, somebody will ask the perpetrator, "Why are you doing this? What are you doing this for? Why are you doing this? Stop doing what the fuck are you doing?" You know, and then the perpetrator sometimes answers back. It's horrible. I think of some of the kids yelling out, "I don't like this," you know, "I don't like this." It's terrible, you know, like, I don't know, I'll never understand evil, but as long as you're here, as long as I'm here, it's good to fight evil. Because bad things happen when good men do nothing. Consider once again the story of Adam and Eve. Life becomes very hard for their children, that's us, after the fall and awakening of our archetypical parents. First is the terrible fate awaiting us in the post-paradisal world, in the world of history, not the least of which is the goatee called our creative endless toil. Humans work, as we have seen. We work because we have awakened to the truth of our own vulnerability, our subjugation to disease and death, and wish to protect ourselves for as long as possible. Once we can see the future, we must prepare for it, or live in denial and terror. We therefore sacrifice the pleasures of today for the sake of a better tomorrow. But the realization of mortality and the necessity of work is not the only revelation to Adam and Eve when they eat the forbidden fruit, wake up and open their eyes. They were also granted or cursed by the knowledge of good and evil. It took me decades to understand what that means, to understand even part of what that means. It's this: once you become consciously aware that you yourself are vulnerable, you understand the nature of human vulnerability in general. You understand what it's like to be fearful and angry and resentful and bitter. You understand what pain means. And once you truly understand such feelings in yourself and how they're produced, you understand how to produce them in others. It is in this manner that the self-conscious beings that we are become voluntary and exquisitely capable of tormenting others and ourselves, of course. But it's the others we are concerned about right now. We see the consequences of this in new knowledge manifest themselves when we meet Cain and Abel, the sons of Adam and Eve. By the time of their appearance, mankind has learned to make sacrifices to God on altars of stone designed for that purpose. A communal ritual is performed, the immolation of something valuable, a choice animal or portion thereof, and its transformation through fire to the smoke, to the spirit that rises to heaven above. In this manner, the idea of delay is dramatized, so that the future might improve. Abel's sacrifices are accepted by God, and he flourishes. Cain's, however, are rejected, and he becomes jealous and bitter. And it's no wonder. If someone fails and is rejected because he refused to make any sacrifices at all, well, that's all at least understandable. He may still feel resentful and vengeful, but knows in his heart that he is personally to blame. That knowledge generally places a limit on his outrage. It's much worse, however, if he had actually foregone the pleasures of the moment, if he had strived and toiled and things still didn't work out, if he was rejected despite his efforts. Then he's lost the present and the future. Then his work, his sacrifice, has been pointless. Under such conditions, the world darkens and the soul rebels. I think of a lot of the writings that I've lost and a lot of paintings that my brother painted that we lost in a storage unit. And a lot of the times where I thought I was doing the right thing, but I probably should have been doing the other thing. Cain is outraged by his rejection. He confronts God, accuses him, and curses his creation. That proves to be a very poor decision. God responds, in no uncertain terms, that the fault is all with Cain, and worse, that Cain has knowingly and creatively dallied with sin, and reap the consequences. This is not at all what Cain wanted to hear. It's by no means an apology on God's part. Did Cain expect God to apologize? Instead, it's insult added to injury. Cain, embittered to the core by God's response, plots revenge. He defies the Creator audaciously. It's daring. Cain knows how to hurt. He's self-conscious after all, and has become even more so in his suffering and shame. So he murders Abel in cold blood. He kills his brother, his own ideal, as Abel is everything Cain wishes to be. He commits the most terrible of crimes in spite himself, all of mankind, and God himself all at once. He does it to wreak havoc and gain his vengeance. He does it to register his fundamental opposition to existence, to protest the intolerable vagaries of being itself. And Cain's children, the offspring, as it were, of both his body and his decision, are worse. In his existential fury, Cain kills once. Lamech, his descendant, goes much further. I have slain a man to my wounding, says Lamech, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. Genesis chapter 4, verse 23 through 24. Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron, Genesis chapter 4, verse 22, is by tradition 7 generations from Cain, and the first creator of weapons of war. And next in the Genesis stories comes the flood. The juxtaposition is by no means accidental. Evil enters the world with self-consciousness. The toil for which God curses Adam, that's bad enough. The trouble in childbirth with which even Eve is burdened and her consequent dependence on her husband are no trivial matters either. They are indicative of the implicit and oft agonizing tragedies of insufficiency, privation, brute necessity, and subjugation to illness and death that simultaneously define and plague existence. He says it how it is, man. Their more factual reality is sometimes sufficient to turn even a courageous person against life. It has been my experience, however, that human beings are strong enough to tolerate the implicit tragedies of being without faltering, without breaking, or, worse, breaking bad. I have seen evidence of this repeatedly in my private life, in my work as a professor, and in my role as a clinical practitioner. Earthquakes, floods, poverty, cancer, we're tough enough to take on all that. But human evil adds a whole new dimension of misery to the world. It is for this reason that the rise of self-consciousness and its attendant realization of mortality and knowledge of good and evil is presented in the early chapters of Genesis and in the vast tradition that surrounds them as a catechism of cosmic magnitude. Conscious human malevolence can break the spirit even tragedy could not shake. I remember discovering with her that one of my clients had been shocked into years of serious post-traumatic stress disorder, daily physical shaking and terror, and chronic nightly insomnia by the mere expression on his enraged, drunken boyfriend's face. On the mere expression on her enraged, drunken boyfriend's face. His fallen countenance, Genesis chapter 4, verse 5, indicated his clear and conscious desire to do harm. She was more naive than she should have been, and that predisposed her to the trauma. But that's not the point. The voluntary evil we do one another can be profoundly and permanently damaging, even to the strong, and what it is precisely that motivates such evil. It doesn't make itself manifest merely in consequence of the hard lot of life. I agree, I've had a hard life. I'm not evil. It doesn't even emerge simply because of failure itself, or because of the disappointment and bitterness that failure often and understandably engenders. But the hard lot of life, magnified by the consequence of continually rejected sacrifices, however poorly conceptualized, however half-heartedly executed, that will bend and twist people into the truly monstrous forms for whom they begin consciously to work evil, who then begin to generate for themselves and others little besides pain and suffering, and who do it for the sake of that pain and suffering. In that manner, a truly vicious cycle takes hold. Begrudging sacrifice, half-heartedly undertaken, rejection of that sacrifice by God or by reality, take your pick, angry resentment, generated by the rejection, descent into bitterness and the desire for revenge, sacrifice undertaken even more begrudgingly or refused altogether, and it's hell itself that serves as a destination place of that downward spiral. Life is indeed nasty, brutish, and short, as the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes so memorably remarks. But man's capacity for evil makes it worse. This means that the central problem of life, the dealing with its brute facts, is not merely what and how to sacrifice to diminish suffering, but what and how to sacrifice to diminish suffering and evil, the conscious, involuntary, and vengeful source of the worst suffering. The story of Cain and Abel is one manifestation of the archetypical tale of the hostile brothers, hero and adversary, the two elements of the individual human psyche, one aimed up at the good and the other aimed down at hell itself. Abel is a hero, true, but a hero who is ultimately defeated by Cain. Abel could please God, a non-trivial and unlikely accomplishment, but he could not overcome human evil. For this reason, Abel is archetypically incomplete. Perhaps he was naive, although a vengeful brother can be inconceivably treacherous and subtle, like the snake in Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. But excuses, even reasons, even understandable reasons, don't matter, not in the final analysis. The problem of evil remained unsolved even by the divinely acceptable sacrifices of Abel. It took thousands of additional years for humanity to come up with anything else resembling a solution. The same issue emerges again in its culminating form in the story of Christ and his temptation by Satan. But this time it's expressed more comprehensively, and the hero wins. That was from Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules of Life. That was from rule number 7. My name is Gregory Brandt. I'm also a writer. If you enjoyed my reading of that, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And also check out my own book. It's called Gonzo Education. There's a playlist of me reading it here on this channel. Thanks again, and have a nice day.